I'm excited to come out to Raleigh. I'm not out here very often. And it's kind of cool to get to tell my story to people who I don't really know. It's unusual to be in front of this many people and not recognize many faces. So as Taylor mentioned, my background, actually let me back up for just 1 second. I'm going to start off with giving you kind of the background of Monuts, how it got started, where we are now, which is kind of about a 2-year time span, and then I'm going to transition into sort of the connections I'm beginning to see between what I started at maybe 5 years ago, where I saw myself going, and where I am as a small business owner. And so as Taylor mentioned, my background has nothing to do with food. I actually moved up to Durham in 2007 to go to grad school at Carolina. I was enrolling in a dual master's program in public health and economic development at UNC. It was for people who were interested in just kind of the connections between those two fields. And for me, what I was interested in most was the intersection of the social and economic conditions that people live in their environments and their health, especially for lower income populations in the United States, where there's great health disparity between those groups. And I think typically in public health, there's been a really big emphasis on behavioral interventions and focusing on getting people to eat better and changing these things that are within their control. And I think that's great, but I don't think it's going to fix everything that's wrong with these huge health disparities we have in our country. And so I was interested in what local governments, state, federal governments, what sort of policies we could use to affect the economic conditions people live. So that would, I think some of the big topics that come up when you're in that field are housing, jobs, education, access to varying qualities of those things. So in 2011, I graduated. I had 2 master's degrees, and I was, I know it looks like I'm carrying the world, but I was ready to save the world, or at least my little part of it. And I was really kind of excited and confident about the skills that I had, the credentials. I was really passionate about what I had gone to school for. And after being in school for so long, you're just ready to get out of the classroom and start doing things. And so I was certain that I would find a job, so certain. And I was so certain that I let Rob, my husband, convince me to go to Europe for the summer. For 2 months, we were off. We spent all of our money because we were like, yeah, you're going to come back and you're going to have job offers. At the very least, you'll have interviews lined up. No worries. We live in RTP. People want to hire you. This is not the case. So I came back in, I think it was probably in August when we got back from Greece. I had a great suntan going on, and I had no money. I had reached that point where I was just I had to get a job. I had to start making money somehow. And I guess you could kind of say that I had reached, not depression, but I was definitely, you come out of grad school with these great expectations for yourself, and you're really confident about what you're capable of doing. And people are going to want to hire you for what you want to do, I guess, right? You have that you're excited. And then you get out there and you realize that people don't necessarily see the same things, the world the way you do. The people who are hiring aren't hiring for what you want to do. And I was in such a niche field that I had to do a lot of convincing. Even when I got into an interview, I had to kind of convince people why I had 2 master's degrees. It wasn't just because I was torn between 2 fields. I wasn't indecisive. I was so decisive. And so I kind of reached my lull, and it was summertime, and I was drinking beer on the front porch a lot in the middle of the day. Just looking for jobs on Craigslist, anywhere. I couldn't even get interviews at Gap or for service jobs. Nobody wanted to hire me. And so it was on one of these fateful afternoons that I was actually giving a tour to a group of students in my neighborhood on community development, and I was walking down past one of the lesser developed streets in the neighborhood, and Nick Johnson, the owner of the cookery, he like popped out from around the corner, and he was like, jokingly, he's like, what are all these white people doing in this neighborhood, you know? It's so unusual. And he was like, I need an intern. So he started talking about getting one of the students. There's a group of grad students from the city planning program. And he was like, yeah, one of you guys can come be my intern. He wasn't talking to me. But I went home that afternoon, just down the street, and I just had this idea that I'm like, yeah, I'm going to email Nick. And I had gotten to that point in job hunting where there's just no more jobs to kind of apply for. You feel like you've reached the end of whatever it is you're looking at. So you're sending blind letters to people who don't know you, trying to convince them to meet you at least. And so that's what I did with Nick. And the funny thing about Nick is that we're neighbors. We knew about each other at least. At least I knew about him. And I sent him probably the least professional cover letter that I've ever sent in my life. It was, Nick's in the audience, that's why I'm pointing. It was something along the lines of like, hey Nick, I'm your neighbor, and I'm an expert at food trucks and the mobile food industry, and I attached pictures of these donuts that I had made, and I told him that I think I'd make a great intern, but that I was probably pretty overqualified for that position, and so I wanted something in exchange. And so me and Nick were able to, kind of come to a deal with each other where I could work out of the cookery and I would be his intern for a set period of time. And his response to me, I'll always remember it because it was so funny, and I don't think I expected him to respond at all because that had been kind of the history of what I was doing. It was just like, strong start, send me your resume. That was all. 4 words. But I could tell by that, like you can read someone's sense of humor or just like what kind of person is, like that's how he responded. And that's when my life kind of shifted from this grad student coming out and like facing the real world trying to find a job to donuts. Donuts on a tricycle, donuts all of the time. And so that's kind of where Monuts was born. As I've already mentioned, I had no money, so I didn't have resources to start a large business. I had a tricycle that a friend of mine who worked at the recyclery in Chapel Hill had acquired, and he put it on my doorstep one day, had a little tag that just said, destined for donuts. A little bit of backstory is that through grad school, when me and my friends were just kind of be frustrated at whatever it was that someone was telling us that we didn't believe in, we had these ideas of what we'd do when we graduate that had nothing to do with what we went to school for. And mine was always to be a baker. I'm like, yeah, I'll bake something, I'll open a bakery, it'll be great. So when the opportunity kind of came that I could use the cookery, I knew what I wanted to make. I wanted to make donuts. I had already had some recipes that I had tinkered with, granted on a very small scale in my kitchen, like frying out of cast iron, never having set foot in front of a real deep fryer before. And so that's kind of where we also knew what the name was already, Monuts. A friend from grad school had named it like 2 years prior, just on the back of a napkin at Cosmic Cantina one day. So this is the tricycle. This is actually the first tricycle. It was free. It had a great bell. And the little contraption on the back that you see was built by Rob, my husband. He built it for me one weekend when I was out of town. I came back and he's like, look, now you really can sell donuts off the tricycle. And it was terrifying. Rob is not a carpenter. He doesn't really know how to do this kind of thing. I lovingly call it the death trap because that thing has sharp edges and like he used nails to put it together, and he didn't file them down on the inside. It's just like spikes all the way down. So when you reach in to get donuts, you come out with scratches of your arms. And so that's how I started out, and I would set up at events that would have me. I would go to the Durham Farmers Market right outside of it with the food trucks. Working out of the cookery, one of the great things was that I was instantly kind of introduced to that food truck community. And even though I wasn't a food truck, they kind of treated me like one of their own, and they would invite me to their events, and I instantly felt like I was part of this new community. This is me at my very first event that I was actually selling something, and my tricycle is not here because I had previously crashed. You can tell I have like road rash on my face. But I had like a big like launch event for myself, and I was just handing out donuts for free downtown, and I left the cookery and I kind of pedaled down this big hill, and then I just tumbled. It was okay. I recovered. And I got a new tricycle out of it, which is even better. It had brakes, which is important when you're carrying a lot of weight on the back side of what you're doing. And so, yeah, I started off very small, and I think I started off with it being still like a temporary solution to my unemployment. I was still kind of keeping my ears out for my dream job, you know, so it was still coming. Had no doubt about it. And for whatever reason, people just loved donuts. I think Durham in particularly maybe had been deprived of them for a while. There weren't any donuts around. And we just started making so many donuts. Like, I don't think, I definitely didn't expect to have grown that quickly. But we did. And I think I brought Rob in. He was still a grad student, which I didn't count as a real job. So I was like, you're just gonna help me. You're gonna help me make donuts, and together we're gonna do this. And it was certainly like a very steep learning curve for us. We didn't have a background in food. And it's really different taking what you're doing at home and then trying to scale it up to do, you know, in like scales of hundreds all of a sudden. And it's a different schedule. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning is not the same as staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning. There's just a lot. And I think after about, I would say, we started in the fall, towards the end of that summer, so 3 seasons in, I had definitely gotten to the point that I knew that I loved what I was doing, but I didn't want to be a donut tricyclist for the rest of my life, right? I knew I had to figure out a way of like building this into something that could sustain me and make me happy with my life and just kind of give me some peace. So that's when we decided to commit to transitioning from the tricycle into a brick and mortar. We signed our letter of intent, I think, in September of 2012. Yeah. So that was just about 1 year after we had started the tricycle. We signed the lease, and then we started a pretty substantial construction project. I wasn't ready for that either. But this is our shop. We opened in March, so just 6 months ago. And it's kind of magical. I never would have kind of, in a real sense, saw myself doing what I'm doing now. And so it's been really exciting the past 2 years. And I remember when we like turned on the twinkle lights in the shop and it was still dark outside because it was in the wintertime, and it just looked so, I don't know, like you just had that sense of pride, like I did this and this is my space now, and it felt so good. And so that's Monuts. That being said, throughout that 2 years, there were definitely, time and time again, where you have just kind of that pang where you set out to do one thing in your life and you switch entirely. And for me, I was passionate about what I wanted to do. Like I had kind of this very idealistic, liberal thought of what I could do, and I think it was something that we need, right? So when I read newspaper articles that I'm just like furious about, and I'm like, shit, I should be in that field doing something, right? Like I spent a lot of time with the intent of doing something. And I don't mean to sound kind of ungrateful or like a whiny baby poo face about it, but it's just that feeling of like, I feel like I copped out on something because it was hard. And it wasn't until I think it was like maybe 2 months ago in the shop that I was running food, and a customer, it was actually someone who I had gone to grad school with, she had her dad in the shop. She introduced me, and he was so blunt with me that it really struck a chord. But she was like, oh, Dad, this is Lindsay, we went to grad school together, and now she owns Monuts. And he was like, you have a master's degree? I'm like, yeah, I have 2. And he was like, and you're doing this? And this, my friend, she has like the dream job that I wanted, right? Like she's doing what I had definitely thought I would be doing. And he looked at me and he was just like, man, that must really suck. And it like cut me to my core. And it wasn't until that moment that I got very defensive of Monuts and just that what I'm doing is meaningful, just kind of, I gave him a small mouthful. But it was then when I realized that where I started as this kind of academic researcher, bound for nonprofit glory kind of thing, and where I ended up as a small business owner, that the two things weren't entirely unconnected, especially with me being interested in job quality and living wage. And now I'm a business owner and I have employees and I have this crazy opportunity to kind of practice what I've preached about. And that's so much cooler. Like, I can't tell you how many conversations I had in grad school when you're like, oh, I ran a model and it says you should be able to do this, and you're talking to someone in the community trying to convince them to change a practice because you have all this research and this evidence that says it's possible and it will make a big impact. But when you're on that side of it, showing people these hypothetical numbers and scenarios, they don't care. They're like, you don't know my business. You don't know what it's like to run a restaurant. You don't know how much that costs. And so now I am on that side of it, and I do know how much it costs, and I do know how hard it is. And for me, it's given me a chance to really look at kind of the obstacles small businesses are facing in trying to offer better jobs in the restaurant industry. So I'm going to go on a small rant. It's very small, but I think we're living in a time right now, and even in Durham and Raleigh, where we place tremendous value on food, where it comes from, how it's being processed. We're willing to pay a premium for ensuring that it's locally grown, organic, hormone-free, antibiotic-free, all of these things. But when it comes to the people who are working in restaurants, it's like we just kind of missed the boat. They're part of the food system. They're certainly part of the local food system, especially in places like Durham and Raleigh, where the restaurants are kind of fueling revitalization in these downtown cores, where they're becoming kind of like iconic of what that city is standing for as a food destination. But these jobs at these restaurants, they're so not good. Like, it's really kind of sad. But in North Carolina as a whole, 1 in every 10 jobs is in the food service and preparation kind of industry. So those are restaurant workers in the kitchen, in the front of the house, cleaning, cooking, all together. This industry is the second largest private industry in the country, but in North Carolina specifically. And it's one of the only industries that kind of sees growth year after year after year, even in recessions, because they're cheap jobs. I mean, you can create a server job for $2 an hour plus tips, whereas it costs a lot more to do a lot of other jobs. On average, they make $8.50 an hour, which is $20,000 a year. They don't get benefits. Health insurance is just like not even a I know when I was telling my friends that I was going to offer health insurance to my employees, they laughed at me and kind of jokingly said, "Oh, let's see where you're at in 6 months," right? Like suggesting that by doing that was such a bad decision that I would regret it in 6 months. And so I think that in this time where food is so valuable to us, that we should maybe value the restaurant workers a little bit more as well. And so I know that I'm not going to sit up here and pretend like I know the answer, because I don't, and I willingly and very, full disclosure, a lot of Monuts has been this, giant trial of figuring out how to do things that I have no idea how to do, from how to make 20 dozen donuts at one time, how to use a deep fryer, to how to hire someone and fill out the forms, and now we're trying to figure out how to do, group health plans. And it's hard. The information for a small business on these types of things, it's not readily available. It's not easy to find, and it's just kind of difficult to work through. But as a small business owner, and even if I'm just one person, and even if my impact will only ever go as far as my 10 or 12 employees, I'm pretty excited that our business, the things that we're valuing, is being able to provide a healthy workplace, a living wage, and giving people a chance to grow. We're not going to keep our dishwasher for 5 years because he's really good at it. We're going to bump him up and see what else he can be good at. We offer health insurance and raises and sick time because I think it's important to do that. And I think it's sad that the restaurant industry hasn't really kind of identified this as a problem. And so I don't know how long that took. Felt quick, but that's all I've got.
So we've got some extra time. If people have any questions for Lindsay, feel free to it.
I have one. So I really admire what you're doing with living wages and really looking behind. So I do think we live in a culture that is, we're a foodie culture, this whole area. There is such an obsession on that. So a two-part question. First, are you connected with other restaurants in this area and other leaders who have the same value as you? And two, how can we promote this so more people care about this and it's more of an issue where restaurants need to get on board for this?
Yeah.
What are ways to do it?
And so the answer to your first question is that, so we just opened our restaurant 6 months ago. So we're, the first 3 months was figuring out how to just run the restaurant. And then the second 3 months, a lot of my time is spent on figuring out how to manage the staff and develop these benefits packages. And I know from a personal place, I didn't want to kind of reach out to other people until I knew for sure what I was doing worked, was legal, was completely above board. And so now that I do have those things in line, I have started to reach out just very informally to friends who are also in the restaurant industry. Just trying to get the word of mouth, me talking to someone. And in terms of promoting it, it's weird because I know in San Francisco they've definitely had grassroots movements to kind of address the issue. But it's not been an easy issue to kind of advocate for, and I don't know why. And so maybe you guys have some ideas. I think part of it is maybe reaching out to the community, not just the restaurant owners, because I think kind of the public has done a great job of putting pressure on restaurants or on businesses to support the things that they support. And so I think some of what has to happen has to come from the community because that's who we're serving. And if they say, hey, it's important to me that you pay your workers a living wage, then maybe they would feel more impetus to. Any other questions?
First of all, Lindsay, I think that what your friend's father said to you was a really big but I'd be interested in knowing if you're willing to talk about financing and how easy or hard that was for you and your husband.
To get the restaurant started, yeah. So we were actually very fortunate. We have a relative who was very interested in what we were doing, and it's actually Rob's uncle who lives in California, and he kind of has believed in Monuts since before Monuts was a thing. And as soon as we knew we wanted to open a restaurant, that was the first place we went to. And it was important for us to structure it as a business loan and not as a family transaction. And so we did that, but it was through a family loan that we were able to get the financing for the restaurant.
I have a friend who owns a restaurant here in town, and we've had many conversations about what that means, and his idea of a restaurant isn't serving people food, it's building a community center, and that's the real purpose for this. And that's what I see you doing as well with your educational background and what you're doing with it. And as far as connecting, I think this is a great start for you. I think you've got a great message, and I think the more that you can do of this, I think the better you will maybe satisfy yourself in what your bigger idea is. So I applaud you for being here, and I encourage you to continue to do things like this.
Thank you. Yes?
Question about resources on which restaurants have better or worse policies. I visited Monuts in, I guess it was March or April, soon after you opened. I didn't realize that was one of your things.
Right.
Whereas I read in the Tricycle Business Journal about the restaurant that was planning to cut everyone to part-time so the owner wouldn't have to pay health insurance. But
That's-
is there a way to find out or ask or what?
I mean, I know about it, like, so this is what I do, and it's just because I'm a nerd and Rob's a nerd, but whenever we post a job on Craigslist, we feel compelled to read all the other jobs posted from other restaurants that we know. And I know that I'm paying a lot better than a lot of other restaurants, and that health insurance has not come up on a single other post that I've seen. And so there's not, at least as far as I know, a public database that I can look at and see what restaurants offer what benefits. I just don't know where that data is other than through kind of backdoors or qualitative interviewing, that sort of thing. That's what actually, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, whether I was going to open up Monuts or figure something else out, in the meantime, I had actually applied for a doctoral program at UNC in economic development, and my dissertation was going to be something along that lines where there was going to be a pretty large data collection phase, just to kind of I think whenever you talk about policies, the first step is always collecting a ton of data so that you can, accurately represent the problem or whatever issue you're trying to address. And so part of this problem is definitely that the data is not as publicly available to address it so readily.
I mean, sorry, I'm her husband. We've gone back and forth over. So like there's other restaurants like Villa's and Chapel Hill. Makes a big deal about letting everyone pay living wage. We've gone back and forth over to be more vocal about, hey, we pay all of our employees, above what Durham considers living wage and things like that. And part of it's like, yeah, we should do that because that way nobody will complain that, we're 20 cents more than we should be for lunch or whatever. But then it's also one of those, like, that should just be something everyone does anyway. And so it feels like we shouldn't have to do that as a marketing thing. It's more so like,
Well, it feels like
it's just something
self-promotion
we
in a
have to
weird
do.
way.
Yeah, like it's just
Or like
our
public shaming.
responsibility as employers. Like, yeah, we probably should pay the guy that has 2 kids more than $75 an hour. We probably should pay him what it takes to raise 2 kids. Yeah.
Have you guys ever thought about having your employees give testimonials and posting that somewhere? So
Yeah.
that it's not so much you self-promoting what you're doing, it's them telling their story.
Yeah, and I've never asked them to do that, but Amelia, our very first employee, who was then the first employee who we offered health insurance to, she started with us when we were on the Tricycle and worked very part-time for like a year and a half. And I love her to death. And after she got health insurance, she posted online, like on her Facebook and on her accounts, very publicly, and she's turning 30 this year, that this is the first time in her adult life that she's had a job that, pays her health insurance, and it's making donuts that's giving her health insurance. And so, and she got a huge reaction from people online. But it's another one of those things where I don't feel like I should ask that of someone. If they want to, I think that's great, but I don't know if I want to necessarily put pressure on them to do that. Yes?
There's a living wage certification program in the Triangle.
Did you say is there? So I know that in the Triangle, when living wage comes up, it's usually with city contracts. So if the city is going to hire one construction crew over another, a lot of times what gets built into contracts if the city is going to pick you is that you have to make sure that you're paying the workers a living wage. And I know that there's some argument over what the actual living wage is. MIT is kind of a national standard since they do it for everybody, but Durham has a different number. I think it's actually $11.69 or $11.68 per hour. But I don't know of any certification program per se.
In Asheville, there is some sort of living wage certification program. So then businesses that are living wage certified,
Right.
Can have that sticker on their door.
Right. That's a good idea. I hadn't heard of that. No, that's interesting. I'll have to look into that. And it's for businesses that are more than, all sorts of types of businesses.
Right.
No, that's a good idea. Yes.
Along those lines, I was kind of thinking, have you had any luck partnering with any kind of public health nonprofits on some sort of public affairs campaign that would maybe create some sort of sticker for Raleigh
Yeah.
while also kind of hitting some of the policies?
So I think that's kind of what my hope is to do now. Like I said, we've only been open for 6 months, and we're just kind of still, this is one of the first mornings that me and Rob have left the shop at the same time for more than an hour together. And so we're still certainly, just barely above water with our time. But I do, one of the benefits of the background that I do have is I have a tremendous kind of network of people who are doing those things who I can tap into. And I have other friends who are in like lobbying for living wage and kind of job quality, and they've told me that they have such a hard time trying to find speakers who are willing to talk about it, and that when I'm ready, to certainly let them know. And so I think that's certainly what I'm hoping to do. And this was kind of, I was excited because it gave me my first chance to talk about it publicly. Yes.
I just wanted to say, Sarah and I work at the North Carolina Justice Center across the street.
Uh-huh.
We do a lot of work on living wage. We have a workers' rights program, and everything you're talking about is really in line with a lot of the work we do. So we have people you should talk to. You'd be, yeah, or as you said, it's always hard to find people who are want to talk about this kind of stuff. We do a lot about restaurant workers. So.
Right. Perfect. Yes.
I understand your instinct to not want to come off as though you're bragging about the good that you do.
Yeah.
But in another sense, isn't it your responsibility to talk about it a little bit more? Or to be more vocal about it as a business? Because then you become a beacon for that. You become a great example.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely been kind of like what Rob had said, just kind of a struggle that we have. Because even like among my friends who work in the industry, when I start talking about it, like it becomes a contentious conversation pretty quickly. And I don't want to be, I think because of the way we started as Monuts and being two kids who aren't in food with like this, more education than either of us needs for what we're doing, and we're doing so well at what we're doing, to be those kids who are then going to start like telling other restaurants how to do what we think they should be doing, that I think it would just start things off on the wrong foot, potentially. I do understand what you say though, like I just want to kind of like take soft steps first and then maybe be a little bit more, yes.
But going off of that, I think you're doing it right. Like, you want to be cautious, but you're gonna make people uncomfortable.
Yes.
Like, no matter what for this, because this is something that happens everywhere. Let's be honest, what goes on, like, this is a violation of human rights.
Right.
We live in a world where so much of what happens is honestly so messed up.
Right.
And by kind of setting this example, and it is a responsibility to come out, it's going to shake things up.
Yeah.
You want to find a way to do it in your own way where you feel comfortable with it.
I think that's what it is right now. It's just figuring out what that way is, making sure we have the time to kind of follow through. We also don't want to do anything half-baked, and so making sure we have the time and energy to put into that cause, because there's also a lot of examples of, just so many things where you start fighting for something and then when the energy dies out or it gets too small or, you just kind of back down, and I don't want that to be the case. But we are committed to it and very passionate about it.